You embarrass me. I'm disgusted by you, my daughter-in-law said. Then my son told me to leave. Have you ever sat at a dinner table, surrounded by laughter and clinking glasses, yet felt like you didn't exist? 2 days before Thanksgiving, I stood in my own kitchen and realized I wasn't welcome in the home I had built. My daughter-in-law told me I was embarrassed. My son told me nothing at all. They didn't have to say I didn't belong. They just stopped looking me in the eyes. But what they didn't know, what I didn't even know at the time, was that silence can be louder than screaming. And sometimes, the quiet ones are the ones who rise. This is not just a story about being dismissed. It's about what happens when a woman reclaims her place, one quiet step at a time. So, if you believe no one deserves to grow old feeling invisible, subscribe and walk with me toward a world that honors the ones who gave us everything. My name is Maureen. I'm 79 years old, and for a long time, I believed love meant sacrifice, staying quiet, staying small, staying useful. I thought if I just kept giving, they'd keep needing me. I was wrong. What happened to me could happen to anyone. It started with a folding chair, a missing recipe box, and a boy who placed his hand on my shoulder without saying a word. That's when everything changed. I'm not here to tell you I fought back with anger. I didn't scream. I didn't slam doors. I simply remembered who I was and who I had always been, long before they tried to rewrite me. Stay with me. Let me tell you what happened the night my daughter-in-law said, "You embarrass me. I'm disgusted by you," and how my son just looked away. Because from that moment on, I knew this story wasn't going to end in shame. It was going to begin in truth. It began, as many silent transformations do, in the quiet hours leading up to a holiday that once meant everything to me. Thanksgiving was 2 days away, but in my own home, I had become a guest nobody noticed. I had been up since 5. My hands moved out of habit, folding laundry in neat squares while the kettle hummed low and steady on the stove. The house was still. Cold air pushed against the windows while the old heating vents creaked and wheezed, a sound I'd come to associate with winter comfort. The smell of cinnamon drifted from the candle I lit every morning, just like my mother used to do. I wasn't trying to impress anyone. It was just routine. I used to run this house, every corner of it. I knew which drawer held the good silver and which cabinet the chipped teacups. But lately, things have started disappearing. My blue pie dish, the recipe box with all the cards written in my handwriting and stained from decades of gravy and sugar. Last week, I found my armchair missing from the den, replaced with a gray folding chair that Chloe said was easier to move when guests came. She smiled when she said it. Always smiling, that girl. I heard the front door swing open, and then Greg's voice, followed by Chloe's heels clacking against the hardwood. "Don't forget to grab the gluten-free stuffing from the car," she chirped. "We're not even gluten-sensitive," Greg muttered. "It's trendy," she replied, already halfway to the kitchen. They came in like wind gusts, arms full of bags from Whole Foods, discussing canapes and Instagram posts. I opened my mouth to ask if they wanted tea, but neither looked my way. I stood by the counter, holding a dish towel like a flag nobody saw. I cleared my throat. I was thinking of making Ray's pecan pie. You know, like I always did. Chloe didn't miss a beat. "Oh, Maureen, that's sweet, but we picked up one from Whole Foods, organic, less sugar." She set the boxed pie on the counter like it was an offering. I looked at the label. Vegan maple pecan tart, gluten-free. Ray wouldn't have touched it. My son gave me a quick squeeze on the arm. "Mom, just relax this year, okay?" Relax. That word used to mean something. A bath, a book, Now it felt like being dismissed. I nodded and forced a smile I didn't feel. My hands returned to the tea towel. They didn't know what to do without something to hold. The front door opened again, and Wesley stepped in, his backpack sliding from his shoulder. 17. Nearly a man now. His hair was damp, like he'd been walking home in drizzle. He gave a short nod to his parents, then glanced toward me. "Hi, Grandma," he said, soft. "Hey, sweetheart." I smiled. The real kind this time. He lingered by the hallway, shifting his weight. Are you coming to the church dinner this year?" I hesitated. I wasn't sure I was invited. He didn't answer, just looked down and gave a little shrug. Then he turned and headed upstairs. The radio in the corner was playing hymns, softly. Something about coming home, about grace. I'd always liked that song. I hummed along under my breath as I cleaned up the counters, wiping down a surface nobody else would have noticed was sticky. In the living room, Chloe laughed too loudly at something Greg said. Some reality shows about rich couples renovating beach homes. I stood in the kitchen, alone, the smell of cinnamon giving way to the faint aroma of reheated takeout. I walked to the closet and pulled out the box labeled Thanksgiving. The decorations inside were the same ones I'd used for 20 years. Turkeys made by Wesley in kindergarten, a cornucopia I once found at a yard sale, faded orange cloth napkins. I carried the box to the dining room and began to set the table, alone. The plates felt heavier this year. My hands shook slightly as I laid out the forks. I looked over at the living room. None of them noticed. I was invisible in my own kitchen. I used to love this season. I really did. The early dark, the flicker of porch lights in the cold, the smell of nutmeg, cloves, and turkey drippings that would stick to the walls for days. Ray and I would start prepping a week in advance, even after Greg got married. He didn't understand why we made so much food when we were just 4 or 5 people. But it wasn't about numbers. It was about memory, about presence. Now, presence felt optional. I placed the napkin rings carefully, each one centered just right. I could hear Chloe in the living room still talking, her voice lilting upward like she was narrating a cooking show. I just feel like less is more, you know? These big meals are so outdated. Greg mumbled something in agreement, then laughed. I couldn't make out the words. I didn't need to. Once, years ago, I'd made a green bean casserole that made the pastor's wife tear up. Said it tasted like her mother's. That recipe is gone now, probably buried in a box under piles of Chloe's neutral palette seasonal decor. Even the centerpiece had been changed. Used to be a bright ceramic turkey Wesley painted when he was 6. Now it was replaced with a glass bowl of dried eucalyptus and white pumpkins. Elegant, cold. I looked down at the table and realized my place setting was missing. No plate, no fork, just a narrow gap between Chloe's curated symmetry. I stood there for a moment, uncertain, then walked back to the kitchen, opened the side drawer, and pulled out a plain white plate. I set it down quietly. Behind me, the refrigerator hummed. The light above the stove flickered, as it had for the last 2 years. I'd mentioned it to Greg once, and he said he'd get to it. He never did. The floor creaked as someone entered the kitchen. I turned to see Greg, rubbing the back of his neck. "Hey, Mom." "Hi." He looked at the pie box on the counter, then at the table. "You really didn't have to do all that. We were just going to do something casual this year." I nodded. "I know. It just felt right." He glanced around, searching for something. "Have you seen the—" "Never mind. Chloe probably moved it." He started to leave, then paused. "Everything okay?" I wanted to say, "No, nothing is okay. I don't know where I belong anymore. I feel like wallpaper, part of the house, but never really seen." Instead, I just said, You seem tired. He exhaled. Yeah, long week. Work's been nuts. And Chloe's mom wants us to host Christmas, which means repainting the guest room and… He stopped himself. I don't want to get into it right now. I nodded again. That phrase had become his shield. I don't want to get into it. As if conversation was a burden. As if I was too delicate to hold space for real things. He gave a quick half smile and left. I stood at the counter for a while. My tea had gone cold. The hymns on the radio shifted to static and I turned it off. Later that afternoon, I tried to call Selena, my neighbor. She used to come by on weekends, and we'd share old church bulletins and talk about the specials at the diner on 3rd Street. But she didn't answer. Her daughter had moved her into assisted living 2 weeks ago. I hadn't visited yet. The quiet was thicker than usual. I pulled on my sweater and went outside. The sky was the color of tin. My breath fogged up the air. A boy on a bicycle sped past, his jacket unzipped, wheels squeaking as he turned the corner. Somewhere down the block, someone was grilling. I caught a faint whiff of charcoal. I walked to the end of the driveway and back. It wasn't much, but it helped. When I came inside, Chloe was on the phone in the kitchen, speaking softly but firmly. Her eyes met mine, and she gave a tight smile. Oh, Maureen, we're ordering Thai tonight. Hope that's okay? I blinked. Sure. She turned back to the call. No, she's fine with it. Just the 4 of us. 4, as if I wasn't standing right there. I didn't eat much that night. A few spoonfuls of cold noodles. Then I excused myself and went upstairs. The sounds of forks tapping against takeout containers followed me up the steps. Nobody said goodnight. I sat in my room with the door half open, a habit I never quite shook. The hallway light spilled across the carpet in a soft amber stripe. Ray's photo was still on the nightstand. I ran my thumb across the glass, brushing away a line of dust. In that photo, we were both young and slightly out of focus, holding a fishing pole between us and squinting into the sun. The lake behind us was gone now, turned into condos. I stared at the ceiling for a while, listening to the radiator tick. Eventually, the house fell quiet. The next morning, I was the first one up again. I padded downstairs, careful not to wake anyone. The tile in the kitchen was cold. I turned the kettle on and rubbed my hands together while the flames sputtered beneath it. The same cinnamon candle sat untouched, its wick bent like a question mark. I lit it anyway. Out of habit, I pulled open the pantry and reached for flour, sugar, and pecans. I stood there holding them for a minute. Then I set them down gently on the counter and closed the cabinet. There was no point. Chloe would wrinkle her nose, say something about cholesterol, and Greg wouldn't say anything at all. I wiped the counter instead, slowly, as if polishing grief. By late morning, the house began to stir. Wesley came down first. No earbuds, no phone. Just him in a gray hoodie and socks. He looked tired. "Morning," I said, offering a smile. "Morning," he replied, eyes flicking toward the living room. He lingered for a second, then opened the fridge, took out yogurt, ate it standing up. "Are you sleeping all right?" I asked. He shrugged. "Yeah, I guess." I nodded. That was the end of it. When Chloe came downstairs, she was already on a video call, waving at her phone like a game show host. Greg followed, yawning, still in his undershirt. They walked past me without a word. I watched them open containers from the fridge, arrange them on the counter, commenting on which ones needed to be plated nicer. Not a single glance my way. As they debated serving trays, I walked to the dining room. The decorations still sat where I'd left them. Not one had been moved. I began setting the table again. Not because anyone asked me to, not because I thought it mattered. but because a table should be set, even if no one notices. The plates went down quietly. I smoothed each napkin, folding the corners in toward the center like I used to when Ray was alive. The silverware clinked in soft rhythm. 1, 2, 1, 2. From the living room, I heard laughter. Chloe said something about a celebrity couple getting divorced, and Greg laughed like it was the funniest thing he'd heard in months. I walked back to the kitchen, looked over at the pie box still untouched. I lifted the corner, peeked inside. It looked like plastic. No warmth, no memory. I poured myself some tea and returned to the dining room, moving slow. Every step felt heavier. I sat down, or tried to. My old cushioned chair was gone, and in its place sat the cold folding chair Chloe had brought in. For space, she said. I sat anyway. The warmth from the tea curled up toward my face. I closed my eyes for a moment, just enough to breathe. I thought maybe I'd go out later, walk around downtown, look at the shop windows, pretend, for a while, that I was someone passing through, not someone quietly being erased. And then I felt it, a hand on my shoulder, warm, steady. I opened my eyes. Wesley stood beside me, saying nothing, just looking down, his expression unreadable. His hand stayed there for a beat longer, an anchor in a room that no longer felt like mine. Then, just as quietly as he came, he walked away without a word. You embarrass me. I'm disgusted by you, Chloe snapped. And my son just stared at his plate. The room went still. Forks hovered mid-air. Even the candle flames seemed to still themselves, as if afraid to flicker too loudly. I sat perfectly still, hands in my lap, the linen napkin clenched so tight between my fingers it might have torn if I dared move. For a moment, I wasn't sure I'd heard her correctly. Not because it was unlikely, but because it was so loudly, so clearly said, in front of so many people. But it happened. Those words had left her mouth like a polished dagger. I looked to Greg. He was seated to Chloe's right, in his blue sweater I'd bought him last Christmas. The one he said was too soft to wear outside. His jaw tightened, but he didn't look up. He just kept cutting his turkey, pushing it around in circles like a child avoiding vegetables. I turned back to my plate. Half the food had gone cold anyway. I couldn't remember taking a single bite. A minute ago, the room had been full of fake laughter and cork pops. Chloe had passed around her cranberry compote with orange zest, bragging about the recipe she found in some Napa magazine. Her mother nodded, eyes glassy with wine, murmuring something about so much better than the canned stuff. No one asked what I used to make. No one asked if I even liked it. Earlier, I had tried to tell a small story, just something warm. I had said, Ray always insisted on extra gravy. He said it made the turkey less lonely. But I hadn't gotten the sentence out before Chloe interrupted with a loud, Speaking of loneliness, you should have seen the sommelier in Napa, absolutely dying to talk to us. Greg had to pretend he was my bodyguard. Laughter followed, quick and superficial. That was the moment I should have gotten up and left the table, but I didn't. I smiled even, a small, tight smile that said, I know my place. I won't ruin your centerpiece. The table was full tonight. Chloe's parents sat at one end, smug in their matching cashmere. Across from me, a woman I didn't know sipped something from a long-stemmed glass and gave my blouse a once-over, like I was wearing something pulled from an attic. Greg had insisted on inviting them all, saying it was good for the family. I hadn't wanted to argue. My hand had trembled slightly when I passed the gravy boat. It wasn't full, but enough sloshed over to stain the edge of the embroidered tablecloth. Just a ring, really. Nothing major. That was all it took. Chloe's voice had snapped like a rubber band. "You embarrass me. I'm disgusted by you." And Greg, my own son, said nothing. Nobody moved at first. I could hear the clink of ice settling in a glass somewhere down the table, the low hum of the radiator against the wall. It was the only sound in the room for several seconds. Then, as if nothing had happened, Chloe turned back to her plate and asked her mother if the sweet potatoes had enough nutmeg. The conversation resumed like a scratched record playing through static. But everything had changed. I sat there, still staring at Greg. He didn't flinch. He didn't look up. He just kept chewing, slowly, methodically, as if his own mother hadn't just been gutted beside him. My ears burned. My hands, once strong from years of cooking and folding and comforting, now trembled under the table. My legs felt hollow beneath me. I tried to remind myself to breathe. In, out. Just like the hymns I used to hum when I couldn't sleep after Ray died. I turned my attention to Wesley. He sat on the other side of the table, his fork resting limp against his plate. He looked like he wanted to speak. His lips parted slightly, then pressed together again. His eyes found mine, but only for a second. Then Chloe cut in again. "Wes, can you help your grandpa with the wine opener?" she said, forcing brightness into her voice. There was no grandpa. She meant her father, but it was a correction. A reminder, maybe, that the title had moved on. Wesley got up without a word. I stayed seated, silently chewing on nothing. This wasn't the first time Chloe had found ways to put me down. The misplaced recipe box, the constant corrections about salt or sugar, the new seating chart that left me next to the door. But it was the first time she'd said it aloud, without hiding behind sarcasm, without masking it as a compliment. She had said it plainly, like it had been waiting behind her teeth for years. I folded my napkin into a tight triangle and laid it on the plate. No one noticed. Greg was talking about stocks with Chloe's father. Someone down the table laughed. The room had moved on. I was still sitting in the wreckage, trying to piece together what part of me had been so offensive. It wasn't the gravy. I knew that much. The candles flickered. I could smell cinnamon and roast rosemary, but the food turned heavy in my stomach. Every glance, every smirk from Chloe's side of the table now felt like a thread unraveling something deep inside me. Something I'd spent a lifetime stitching together with grace. I thought about saying something, about standing up and asking if anyone else thought that was appropriate, to insult a woman at her own table, in her own house. But then I looked at Greg again, still chewing, still staring at his plate like it held the meaning of life. I knew then, if I spoke, I'd be speaking alone. So instead, I stood, slowly, quietly. I pushed the chair back an inch at a time, trying not to scrape the floor. A few heads turned, but no one said anything. I picked up my glass of water and carried it with both hands like it was something sacred. And I walked. The hallway was dim. I didn't bother turning on the light. I knew the way. Every floorboard here still remembered my steps, even if the people didn't. I passed the entry table where Ray used to leave his keys. His old fishing hat still hung by the door. Nobody touched it. Maybe they didn't even notice it was there anymore. I used to dust around it carefully, like it might fall apart if handled wrong. My feet barely made a sound on the staircase, but I felt the weight of each step like I was dragging all 79 years of myself behind me. When I reached the landing, I paused. Below me, the dining room was still glowing, that warm golden light Chloe was so proud of. Her autumnal ambience, she called it. The clink of glassware, the lilting laughter of people who didn't ask if I was okay, who didn't even see me stand up. Greg's voice drifted up, calm and easy. "Chloe, that dessert was perfect." And then someone else, maybe her mother, said, "You really know how to host, dear." Of course she did. She'd removed the only complication in the room, the stain on her picture-perfect night. Me. I looked down at the staircase railing, traced my fingers along the grooves Ray carved into it after we bought the house. They were still there, worn but intact. A reminder of a different kind of dinner table, one where no one had to look for permission to speak. I stepped into my bedroom. It smelled faintly of cedar and lavender. The sachets I kept in the dresser, the ones Chloe said were a bit too musty and tried to replace once with something from Pottery Barn. I sat on the edge of the bed, the mattress sighing under me. For the first time in years, I didn't turn on the small lamp. I just sat there in the quiet, the dark. My throat burned, but I didn't cry. Not yet. Crying felt too much like surrender, like giving her those words twice. "You embarrass me. I'm disgusted by you." I repeated them silently in my head, not because I believed them, but because I needed to hear what had really been said, not dressed up, not softened, just as they were. And Greg, God help him, hadn't said a word to stop it. I wasn't expecting a grand speech. I wasn't expecting him to stand up and storm out on my behalf. But I wasn't expecting silence either. Not from the boy who once built me a jewelry box out of popsicle sticks and told me I was the queen of kindness. I looked toward the window. Fog had begun to settle in the yard, coating the tops of the hedges like ash. Even the moon seemed distant tonight. I thought I'd feel broken, but mostly I felt empty. Maybe that was worse. A soft laugh drifted up the stairs. Then another. Dishes clinked. Someone turned on the record player downstairs. Jazz, maybe. Chloe always picked something tasteful after dessert. I reached over and took off my earrings, the ones Ray gave me for our 40th anniversary. They felt too heavy now. Or maybe I did. Then, with a slow exhale, I laid back against the pillows. Downstairs, the house went on. Maureen walks upstairs alone. Behind her, laughter slowly resumes. After the guests left, I went to the attic. Not to cry, but to remember who I was before they told me who I wasn't. The house had finally gone still, save for the soft hum of the dishwasher and the occasional clink of a glass being loaded into the rack downstairs. Chloe's laughter had faded, replaced by the sterile sounds of cleanup and the sharp scent of lemon soap cutting through what was left of Thanksgiving. I waited until I was sure no one would see me. The attic bedroom wasn't a real bedroom, not the kind guests ever walked into. Months ago, Chloe had said the main-level guest room would be better used as a home office. It was said lightly, with a smile, as she folded a brochure about ergonomic chairs. My boxes had been moved while I was at the doctor's. When I got home, my crocheted throw was already laid across the narrow bed under the attic's sloped ceiling, like a gentle suggestion to settle in. Tonight, the floor creaked beneath my slippers as I stepped inside. The bulb on the pull chain flickered twice before staying lit. Cold air hugged the beams, and the window pane wore streaks of rain like mascara on a grieving face. I walked past the old steamer trunk I hadn't opened in years, past the baby quilt I'd sewn when Greg was born, still folded neatly in the cedar chest. Everything in here belonged to an earlier version of me, a woman who once had a seat at her own table. In the corner, the Thanksgiving tablecloth lay just where I'd left it, a deep burgundy cotton with golden stitching. I'd pulled it out 3 weeks ago, hoping someone would ask for it. Nobody did. So I hadn't brought it up again. I lifted it now, letting the creases unfold between my hands, and pressed it gently to my chest. And that's when I saw the cookie tin, round, faded green, once bright with dancing snowmen. It used to hold sugar cookies I made with Wesley every December, the kind you roll in powdered sugar before baking, the kind that left fingerprints of joy on a child's mouth. I hadn't used it in years. I knelt slowly, the cold biting through my knees even on the thin rug, and opened the lid. Inside, layers of folded napkins with candy cane prints, an old ticket stub to Wesley's first school play, the pressed maple leaf he'd once brought me with the words, "I picked it because it's old and beautiful like you." I smiled, aching. At the very bottom, beneath a cracked snow globe missing most of its water, lay an envelope. My name was written on the front, Grandma Maureen, in Wesley's handwriting. The slant of the letters looked deliberate, the loops too neat. It was the kind of careful penmanship a boy uses when he knows what he's saying might matter. And in the bottom corner, in smaller script, "Only if you ever feel like leaving." I stared at it, not because I didn't understand, but because part of me had been waiting for something like this, a sign that someone else still saw what was happening, that someone else, even just one, still believed I was more than an echo. My fingers trembled as I lifted the envelope. The air felt thinner suddenly, like my breath didn't quite belong here. I opened it. The letter was written in blue ink, the kind that bleeds slightly if you press too hard. And Wesley had. Each line carried the weight of his hand, his worry, his words. "Dear Grandma," it began. "I don't know if this is dumb or dramatic or whatever, but I wanted to say something just in case." I swallowed hard. "I've noticed how things are. I mean, the way Chloe talks to you. I hate it. But I never know what to do. Every time I try to speak up, it feels like the air gets sucked out of the room, like she dares me to pick a side. And Dad just shuts down." And I could see him writing it, probably in his room late at night, his door barely cracked open, maybe while the house was quiet. Or maybe after another small silence that had cut too deep. "I tried texting you a few times after school," the letter went on. "But Chloe said she had to clean up our family group chat. She said it was getting cluttered. I didn't think much about it until I noticed your replies weren't showing up anymore." So that explained the strange gaps. The unanswered messages I had assumed were just forgotten. They hadn't been. They'd been erased. My chest tightened. "I think she's deleting our texts," Wesley continued. "I tried showing Dad, but he told me not to stir things up. He said you're just sensitive lately." The paper quivered in my hands. My throat ached with a quiet grief that didn't come from death, but from being erased while still alive. "I just want you to know I see it," he wrote. "I see you. I see how much you do and how no one says thank you anymore. I'm sorry I don't know how to fix it. I'm just a kid. But I wanted you to have this, in case one day you think no one notices." There was a small space. Then, as if he had second-guessed how bold he'd been, he added, "Please don't disappear. You're the only one who still looks at me like I'm more than just someone they're trying to shape. Please don't give up on me." I read it again and again. By the third time, my hands were shaking too hard to hold the page steady. I pressed it to my chest, right over the place that had gone hollow earlier that evening. He had seen it. He had seen me. Not as the fragile old woman they tried to frame with politeness and folding chairs, but as someone whose presence mattered. Someone who had once meant enough for a boy to tuck a letter away, just in case. It was the quietest form of rescue I had ever known. The kind that doesn't shout, doesn't save, just reminds you you're still alive. I sat there on the attic floor, surrounded by cookie tins and dusty linens, and air that hadn't been breathed in properly for months, and I cried, not out of weakness, but because that letter had pulled something back into my chest that I thought I'd lost, something like dignity, something like will. I stood up slowly, the letter still in my hand. The cold floor creaked beneath me like an old song, and I knew what I needed to do. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the envelope, slipping it into my cardigan pocket like it was something holy. Downstairs, the house creaked as the heater kicked in. I could hear the muffled sounds of the television, canned laughter, a commercial, then Chloe's voice, sharp and amused, floating up through the vents. She was always so careful with her words around others, until she wasn't, until the mask slipped and what she really thought of me came pouring out. "You embarrass me. I'm disgusted by you." That voice still rang in my head like the clatter of dropped silverware. But now, another voice spoke louder. Wesley's letter had pulled me from the shadows they kept pushing me into. It wasn't that everything was suddenly better. It wasn't. But I wasn't invisible. Not to him. Not to myself. I stood in front of the small mirror nailed crooked to the attic wall. The woman staring back wasn't who they thought I was. She was older, yes, slower, softer around the edges. But she was also the woman who had held Greg through 2 fevers in 1 week. The woman who had baked over 1,000 cookies with her grandson. The woman who had folded napkins into swans for Thanksgiving tables no one asked her to decorate anymore. That woman hadn't disappeared. She'd just been boxed up like the linens, stored away, politely ignored. No more. I opened the small closet and pulled out my heaviest coat. Navy wool with big brass buttons. The one I wore to my husband's funeral. The one that made me feel like I still had shape, structure. I slid it on and felt its weight settle on my shoulders like armor. Downstairs, the front door creaked as Greg stepped outside, probably taking the trash to the curb. I waited, listening for the door to click shut again. When it did, I moved. My shoes were still by the attic stairs. I slipped them on and tied the laces with fingers that no longer trembled. I didn't look back at the attic. I didn't need to. I moved down the hallway, careful on the old wooden boards, my coat rustling softly. Wesley's letter pressed against my side like a secret heartbeat. When I reached the front hall, I paused. There were voices in the kitchen. Chloe's laugh, Greg's low, uncertain replies, a clink of glass, a match being struck for another candle. They didn't hear me. I opened the door. The cold slapped my cheeks, bracing and clean. Fog drifted in tendrils across the yard, the porch light casting long shadows onto the steps. I pulled the coat tighter around me. There was no plan, no suitcase, no confrontation, just this. A woman choosing to step into the night rather than sit at a table where she wasn't wanted. A woman holding on to the one voice that still reached her in the dark. I stepped off the porch and began walking down the sidewalk. The street was silent. A neighbor's jack-o'-lantern still sat by their driveway, its grin soft and collapsing. The wind carried the faintest scent of pine and fireplace smoke. I wasn't running away. I was going toward something. And that something, I realized as the cold bit at my cheeks, wasn't a destination on a map, but a connection I hadn't sought in far too long. The night was bitter, but somewhere a warm hearth awaited. That night, I slept in Tamara's guest room with a borrowed blanket and the sound of wind in the chimney. And by morning, the smell of cinnamon told me I hadn't imagined her kindness. The wind howled down Haywood Road that morning, but Tamara's kitchen smelled like cinnamon and second chances. I hadn't planned where I was going. I just walked until my legs hurt and my fingers felt like glass. But when I saw the little white cottage at the end of the lane, the one with the crooked wind chime and the blue shutters that needed repainting, I knew exactly whose house it was. Tamara Mosley had always been the kind of woman who didn't knock before entering. She came in the side door, wiped her feet, and brought truth with her, whether you wanted it or not. We'd known each other for nearly 50 years, since we met at a local PTA meeting back when we still thought casseroles and carpool lanes would save the world. We hadn't talked much in recent months, not since Greg and Chloe started closing the circle tighter, making visitors feel like intruders. But I knew she'd open the door. And she did. She didn't say anything at first, just pulled me inside, took one look at my soaked coat, and said, Jesus, Maureen, you'll freeze your bones clean off. She guided me toward the kitchen like I was a child who'd wandered home after getting lost at the fair. The warmth hit me first, then the smell. Nutmeg, cinnamon, something buttery and golden baking in the oven. Tamara's kitchen hadn't changed in decades. Same chipped tile, same row of mismatched mugs, same radio on top of the fridge playing soft gospel like a heartbeat you could hum to. She handed me a towel. Sit. I did. We didn't talk for a while. She poured tea, set a slice of pie in front of me. Sweet potato, I think, with a crust that flaked at the edges and melted into the plate like it knew its job was to comfort. I hadn't realized how hungry I was until I took the first bite. Or how empty I'd been feeling until her silence filled the room with something that felt like safety. She didn't ask what happened. She didn't have to. Tamara was the kind of friend who knew when the truth wasn't ready to be spoken yet. So she let me eat. Let me wrap my fingers around the hot mug. Let me stare at the wall of faded family photos. None of them mine, and yet somehow familiar. Smiling cousins, fishing trips, a Thanksgiving from the 90s with a turkey so dry it needed prayer. The wind shook the windows. Rain tapped the glass like a restless visitor who didn't know when to leave. But inside, it was still. I didn't cry. Not then. I just breathed. When I looked up, Tamara was watching me with eyes sharp as ever. "They don't see you," she said, her voice low, like she was talking to a confession booth. "But I do. And I'm not the only one." I didn't say anything, not because I didn't believe her, but because I was afraid if I opened my mouth, all the grief would come pouring out. Too loud, too raw. And Tamara's kitchen didn't deserve that kind of mess. She stood, wiping her hands on the front of her apron. A faded floral thing she probably bought before Reagan left office. Then she turned back to the counter and cut herself a slice of pie. For a moment, we ate in parallel silence, like old soldiers returning from different battles but sharing the same scars. "You know Chloe didn't invent this," Tamara finally said, slicing through the quiet like a warm knife. "She's done it before. To Selena Ortega. You remember Selena, don't you?" Of course I did. Selena used to help run the charity booth with us every December at the downtown church fair. Big-hearted, a little scatterbrained, always wore glittery sweaters even when it wasn't Christmas. She disappeared from our circle about 4 years ago. Tamara had said she moved closer to her daughter, but it had never felt like the full story. "Chloe made her feel small," Tamara continued. "Started quietly. Eye rolls, comments about being out of touch. Then it was side remarks to Greg, planting doubts. Eventually, Selena just stopped coming around. Said it was too much trouble. I didn't believe her then. I sure as hell don't now." I sat back in the chair, the vinyl creaking beneath me. "You think she's doing the same to me?" Tamara didn't blink. "I know she is. But here's the difference, Maureen. Selena thought being quiet would protect her. You've already seen that silence is their weapon, not yours." Her words landed with a thud in my chest. Not sharp, but heavy, like a truth I'd carried so long I forgot it wasn't mine to bear. I looked out the window. The rain had slowed to a drizzle. Fog drifted low through the trees. The kind of fog that made everything seem softer, but not safer. Just quieter, like the world was waiting. "She deleted my text to Wesley," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Tamara nodded like she'd known all along. "That boy sees more than they think. His note? That wasn't a pity. That was courage. And it's time you had some of your own." I closed my eyes. The letter still pulsed in my coat pocket. A heartbeat I hadn't known I needed. "I don't know where to start." "You start by showing up," she said. Come to Sunday service with me. Let people see you again. The real you, not the version Chloe paints in her curated little world. I blinked at her. I stopped going after they moved my seat to the back. Tamara's smile didn't reach her eyes. Then it's time to sit up front. We didn't speak much after that. Sometimes the truth doesn't need repeating. It just needs to settle in the room, like the scent of cinnamon that lingered in Tamara's curtains long after the oven cooled. I helped her wash the dishes. She handed me the towel like old times, and we moved in rhythm. Two women who'd seen decades fold and unfold, who'd buried husbands, raised sons, and learned how silence could bruise just as deeply as words. Tamara had no children of her own, but she'd mothered half the neighborhood at one point or another, and today she was mothering me. Not with pity, but with presence. When I stood to leave, the rain had stopped completely. The clouds broke in uneven strips, letting slivers of pale morning light touch the gravel path outside her front door. My shoes were still damp, and I felt the cold in my knees, but there was something else under my skin now. Something steadier. Tamara grabbed her coat from the hook. Wait. She walked over to the cluttered drawer near the back door. The one where she kept paper clips, expired coupons, and the spare keys to every neighbor's house. She rifled through a stack of old envelopes and pulled out a folded piece of paper. No envelope, just creases so deep you could tell it had been handled, unfolded, reread. She pressed it into my hand. Names. I looked at her confused. Women, she said softly. Women like you, like Selena. Women Chloe's run over with that shiny smile and those careful lies. I didn't think it was my business before. I was wrong. My fingers gripped the paper, the edges soft from time and care. I didn't open it. Not yet. Tamara stepped back, studying me like she was seeing something form behind my eyes. I don't know what you'll do, but I know you'll do it differently now. And when you do, you won't be alone. I nodded, not a big nod, just enough to say I heard her. And that maybe, for the first time in a long while, I was hearing myself too. I walked out the door with the paper in my coat pocket, warm from her hand. The fog had lifted, my breath still clouded in the cold air, but my steps felt firmer, like I was stepping into something solid. It wasn't revenge I was after. It was return. Return to myself, to the truth, to the parts of me they had no right to edit. And the first step of that return, Tamara had made very clear, involved dressing for battle. I hadn't worn that lavender coat in 7 years. Not since the day Chloe told me I looked like I was trying too hard. It had been stuffed in the back of the hall closet, under an old vacuum cleaner and a basket of tangled cords no one had touched in a decade. The sleeves were still soft. The lining smelled faintly of cedar and something older, maybe comfort or defiance. I brushed it off, ran my hands down the buttons, and tried to ignore the echo of Chloe's voice in my memory. If you're going to be invisible, Tamara had said, might as well haunt them while you're at it. So I zipped the coat, tied my scarf, and walked out into the crisp Sunday air, letting the maple leaves catch in my curls and the wind tug at my breath. Tamara was already waiting by the corner, her gray knit hat pulled low, a thermos of peppermint tea in her hand. She didn't say anything, just handed me the warm metal and nodded toward the church down the block. First Light Baptist sat at the bend of Haywood Road, its steeple modest but the welcome mat generous. I hadn't walked through its doors since the year Greg stopped calling me every Sunday, since Chloe had started inviting the pastor's wife to brunch, without me. But the church hadn't changed much. The same hymn board hung above the pulpit, the same wood-paneled walls with peeling corners. The foyer smelled like lemon oil and bulletin paper. I caught a glimpse of the stained glass windows, and something in me softened, even if just for a breath. The moment we stepped into the sanctuary, the whispering started. Not loud, just the kind that prickles the back of your neck. A shift in posture, a smile that doesn't quite reach the eyes, a few turned heads, a tap on a neighbor's arm. I saw Mrs. Penfield, who once sent me rhubarb jam every winter. She looked right through me. Tamara pressed her shoulder lightly against mine. "Let them look," she muttered. We took a pew 3 rows from the front. I didn't expect Chloe and Greg to show up. They were the kind of people who preferred sleek, televised sermons or holiday drop-ins. But just after the first hymn, I heard the click of heels and saw Chloe's curated smile float down the aisle. She saw me, stopped, blinked. Tamara raised an eyebrow in amusement. I stayed still. Greg followed, his face unreadable. They slid into a pew behind us, and I could feel the air tighten between our backs. During the announcements, Pastor Raymond's voice still had that creaky warmth, like an old rocking chair you forgot how much you missed. He talked about the spring committee forming soon, about the women's candlelight service next week. My hands rested quietly on my lap, but my heart beat hard enough that I thought someone nearby could hear it. Then came fellowship hour. People stood, murmured, hugged, or awkwardly shook hands, depending on how long they'd been away. I was about to slip out the side when a voice called softly, "Maureen?" I turned. The woman had aged, but I recognized her. Selena Ortega. Her hair was shorter now, her frame smaller, but her eyes, they held something that reached into me like a shared wound. "I wasn't sure it was really you," she said, her voice warm, trembly. "I didn't think you'd still be here," I replied. "Oh, I left, but I came back. Eventually, when I could breathe again." We stood there, surrounded by chatter and coffee and laughter, but between us, a different kind of conversation unfolded, one without many words. "She did it to me too," Selena said, barely a whisper. Chloe, the smiling exclusion, the way she rewrote stories about me until my son didn't know who I was anymore. My lips parted, but no sound came, just a dry breath. "She's charming," Selena continued. "She never screams, just edits. And people believe the cleaner version." Behind her, I saw Pastor Raymond pause nearby with his mug. He caught just enough of our exchange to frown thoughtfully, then glance at me with something resembling recognition. Then my phone vibrated. A short buzz. A message from Wesley lit up the screen. "I see you. I'm proud." The text from Wesley lingered on the screen, and for a moment, I forgot how to breathe. I read it twice, then a third time. "I see you. I'm proud." It wasn't flowery or dramatic, but it steadied something in me that had been wobbling for far too long. I put the phone away slowly, like it was something sacred. Tamara found me by the hallway water cooler, her face unreadable but always aware. "Good?" she asked it. I nodded. Getting there, we sat in the last few folding chairs during coffee hour, balancing paper plates of banana bread and lukewarm decaf. Greg stood across the room talking to the church treasurer, but Chloe's eyes never left us. A flickering stare, half curious, half calculating. I watched her scan Selena, then me, and something behind her smile cracked ever so slightly. Tamara leaned in, her voice barely a thread. "She's trying to figure out what we're saying, what we know, who we still are. She always assumes no one remembers," I murmured back. "Funny thing about shame," Tamara said, sipping her coffee. "It only works when no one names it." Before I could respond, Pastor Raymond made his way to our table. He was holding a clipboard, the kind with doodled hearts in the margins from the youth choir. "Maureen," he said kindly. We're starting to plan for the spring renewal committee. Decorating, care baskets, music rotation, all the fun, mildly exhausting things. He chuckled. Would you like to be part of it again? My mouth went dry. I haven't helped since. I know, and that's why I'm asking. His eyes were steady, not pitying. The door was never closed from our side. I blinked. For a moment, I thought I might cry, but instead I just nodded. Yes, I'd like that. When he left, Tamara gave a small grin. You're not invisible anymore, sweetheart. No, I said softly. I'm not. But peace is rarely allowed to linger long in the presence of the guilty. Chloe cornered me near the coat rack just before we were about to leave. Her heels clicked against the linoleum like punctuation marks to a sentence I didn't want to hear. What are you doing here? She hissed, smile still glued on in case someone walked by. You haven't shown up in years. I know, I said. I used to think I wasn't welcome. She scoffed. This isn't about you. No, I replied. But I belong. That's enough. It wasn't loud. It wasn't triumphant. But something in her froze. Maybe it was the calm in my voice, or the fact that Tamara had stepped just close enough behind me to make her realize she wasn't in control of the moment anymore. Chloe opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Then she straightened her blouse and walked past me like I was furniture. As I pulled on my lavender coat and zipped it up, I felt Tamara's eyes on me. Well, she said, look at that. Look at what? I asked yet, brushing lint from my sleeve. She blinked first. We stepped into the chilly air, the sound of church bells echoing down the block. The congregation spilled out behind us, laughter and chatter rising into the sky. But I walked slowly, savoring each step like it was reclaiming square footage of myself. At the edge of the parking lot, Tamara slipped a small paper into my hand. What's this? I asked it. Insurance, she said. I unfolded it. A list. Names I recognized. Women I'd known in passing, nodded to in the supermarket, shared recipes with once. Women I hadn't realized Chloe had isolated one by one. At the bottom, Selena Ortega. And beside it, in Tamara's clean, no-nonsense handwriting. Each one said they'd speak. Just say the word. The hallway behind the sanctuary smelled of old hymnals and lemon polish, the kind of scent that clung to church sweaters and long-ago memories. I stepped into it alone, needing a moment of quiet before we left. That's when I heard the click of heels behind me. Chloe's voice came low but sharp. What are you doing here? I turned slowly. She was standing stiffly near the coat rack, one manicured hand clutching her purse like it was armor. Her lips were tight, her eyes scanning the empty corridor to make sure no one else heard. I thought we agreed you'd step back, she hissed, still keeping her tone sweet enough for church walls. That you'd let us move forward. I studied her for a long breath. The lavender coat I wore felt heavier now, not from shame, but from history. I nearly burned it once. Now, I was glad I hadn't. I belong, I said simply. That's enough. She blinked once. A flicker of something crossed her face. Not quite fear, not quite confusion, but the discomfort of someone realizing their lines no longer land. Then she scoffed softly. You've always been dramatic. No, I replied. I've always been quiet. That's not the same thing. Chloe's shoulders straightened, and just as quickly she turned and walked away. Heels echoing too loudly in the empty hallway. When I stepped back into the main vestibule, the air was warmer again. Tamara was waiting by the side door, hands tucked into her thick knitted gloves, smiling patiently and knowing. Well, she asked. She's not sure what to do with me anymore, I said, tugging my coat closed. I think that's a good thing. Tamara nodded once, satisfied. As we stepped outside into the bright cold, the wind carried the scent of wood smoke and wet leaves. The world had shifted a little, just enough to notice. We walked side by side, our steps slow and steady. I hadn't noticed how many red maple leaves still clung to the branches above. They fluttered like warnings, or maybe promises. Brittle, but not broken. Tamara paused just before we reached the sidewalk. Her voice dropped just low enough to be heard over the rustling trees. Next Sunday is the women's candle service, she said. Are you ready to be seen again? Her question hung in the chilly air, a promise of a new beginning. But before I could fully step into that light, there was one more piece of my past I needed to reclaim. A final farewell to the place where my quiet struggle had begun. I didn't leave their house that night because I was ashamed. I left because I finally remembered who built the foundation. The front steps creaked the same way they had for decades, but this time, I didn't pause at the threshold. I rang the doorbell, not out of politeness, but because it wasn't mine to walk into anymore. Greg opened the door, blinking like I had startled him. Hey, Mom, he said, voice half stuck in his throat. His hair was a little thinner, his eyes a little softer than I remembered. He stepped aside. The baking dish, I said, keeping my voice even. It's still here, right? Yeah, of course. It's in the kitchen. He scratched the back of his neck, then moved ahead of me, like he wasn't sure if he should lead or follow. The house smelled like lemon cleaner and tension, not the buttery warmth of cinnamon or roast chicken, just sterile. Chloe stood by the window, arms folded, a cardigan tight across her shoulders though it wasn't cold. She turned when she saw me, then didn't say a word. No smile, no nod, just silence, sharp enough to cut through. I didn't look away, not anymore. Wesley's upstairs, I think, Greg offered, like that might smooth something over. Packing. I nodded and walked into the kitchen. The dish was there on the counter, wrapped in foil. The one I used every Easter, every Christmas, every birthday casserole. It was plain, heavy, old, my mother's before it was mine. Somehow, it had survived where other things hadn't. I picked it up and turned to leave. You don't have to rush off, Greg said. We're making dinner. Chloe got takeout from that Thai place you used to like. I let out a quiet breath through my nose. That's kind of you, but I have guests waiting. He opened his mouth, then shut it. There was so much unsaid between us, it almost felt like noise. Wesley came down the stairs with a duffel bag slung over his shoulder and his phone in his hand. He stopped when he saw me and broke into a smile so warm it made my throat sting. Grandma, he came forward and hugged me tight, arms strong now, taller than I remembered. He smelled like peppermint gum and laundry detergent. You'll be amazing, I whispered. He reached into his hoodie pocket and pulled out a small envelope. Graduation's next weekend, he said. I wasn't sure you'd come back here, so I wanted to make sure you had this. I held it like it was made of glass. I wouldn't miss it for the world, I said. Behind him, Chloe turned her face away. I could have stayed longer, could have made some comment to smooth things over, to pretend we were still a family in the way that mattered. But I didn't. I placed the baking dish into my tote bag and reached into the second one I'd brought with me. The pie. Same crust, same filling, same care. The one Chloe had laughed at, called old-fashioned, the one Wesley always asked for. I set it on the counter gently. No hard feelings, I said. But my voice didn't offer apology. It offered peace. Greg looked down at the pie, then at me. You made this. For my guests, I said, then added, but it travels well. Neither of them spoke again as I walked to the door. When I opened it, spring hit me like a bomb. Tulips bloomed along the edges of the front walk. The wind was gentle, coaxing petals from the cherry tree like confetti. Tamara sat behind the wheel of her old Lincoln, window rolled down, sunglasses on despite the clouds. In the back seat, Selena waved, a book in her lap. I didn't look back, but I felt it. Their eyes behind me, the weight of everything we didn't fix. And still, it didn't stick to me like it used to. Not anymore. I slid into the front seat, gripping the edge of my tote bag as the door clicked shut beside me. Tamara didn't say anything at first. She just reached over and turned on the radio. Soft gospel filling the silence between us. Selena leaned forward from the back seat, her voice gentle. Was it strange being back? I nodded. Not strange. Familiar in all the wrong ways. The car pulled away from the curb, tires crunching softly over gravel and pollen-dusted asphalt. I watched the house shrink in the rearview mirror, not as a wound, but as a closed chapter. Selena sat back, folding her hands in her lap. You know, Chloe tried to warn my daughter I was unstable, said I needed distance to heal. All it did was leave me sitting alone every Sunday with no explanation. I'm sorry, I said. She smiled. Don't be. I see it now. And so does she. We drove in a comfortable quiet, the kind that comes only after all the noise has settled, the kind you earn. When we got to my new place, a rented cottage tucked behind a row of sugar maples, Tamara helped carry the pie and the dish inside. The kitchen smelled like fresh tulips and lemon oil, not because I was trying to impress anyone, but because I liked it that way. I set the dish on the counter and slid the pie onto the rack to cool. Mother's Circle is next Sunday, Tamara reminded me, sipping her tea without ceremony. You're still speaking, right? I hesitated, my fingers trailing across the edge of the countertop. I don't know what I'm going to say yet. Doesn't matter, she said. You just have to stand there. Selena looked up. We'll be in the front row. And I believed them. That night, after they left, I stood at my front window and watched the sky darken. The tulips outside glowed faintly under the porch light, petals closed like resting hands. I thought of all the times I had been quiet to keep the peace, to keep the house, to keep the image of a family intact. Not anymore. This house wasn't big. It didn't have polished floors or curated centerpieces. But it had my books, my blankets, my breath. It didn't apologize for what it wasn't. And neither did I. The following Sunday, the church foyer buzzed with gentle chatter and the scent of potluck casseroles. Women passed candles down the pews, each flame lit from the one before it, like truths finally being named out loud. I stood near the podium, holding my folded note in my hand. My name was written in careful script on the program. Maureen Whitmore, Reflection. Funny how something so simple could carry so much weight. Pastor Raymond gave a warm introduction, then stepped back, nodding for me to begin. I didn't need the note. I walked to the mic, the wooden floor creaking softly beneath my steps. Faces turned, some familiar, some new. Chloe was not among them. Greg wasn't either. But I saw Wesley near the back, arms crossed, head high. I cleared my throat. This isn't about what was taken from me, I began, voice steady. It's about what I chose to carry forward. No one spoke. No one needed to. I looked out at the candles flickering in careful hands, at Selena, at Tamara, at myself, reflected faintly in the stained glass behind the altar. I spoke for 3 minutes, no more. I spoke of pie crust and silence, of names erased from group texts, of folding chairs where dining seats used to be, and I spoke of coming back, not in anger, but in truth. When I stepped down, they didn't clap. They stood. And that was more than enough. The journey hadn't been easy, nor was it truly over. But that day, something profound shifted, not just in the room, but within me, echoing a lesson I would carry forward. I used to think that staying quiet was the best way to keep peace, but that silence slowly made me disappear inside my own family. It wasn't until I read my grandson's letter, shared a pie with an old friend, and put on the coat I was once mocked for, that I finally understood. If you don't value yourself, even those closest to you can forget how to. Kindness isn't always appreciated, but self-respect should never be surrendered. If this story touched you, consider passing it along to someone who might need a quiet reminder that they still matter.